he already knew. That is the part most people miss about Lucius Annaeus Seneca. In the spring of 65 AD, when the Praetorian tribune arrived at his door with the emperor's order, Seneca was not surprised. He had spent 13 years watching the boy he tutored become the man now demanding his death. He turned to his friends who were weeping and asked them quietly, where were all those lessons about philosophy? He had written, for decades, about how to face death without flinching. Now the moment had arrived to either mean those words, or to be exposed as a man who had only ever written beautiful lies. Before we get to that final scene, there is something you need to understand about Seneca's situation, something that almost nobody talks about. He saw Nero's corruption coming, and he stayed anyway. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why, and why that decision has something urgent to say to anyone who has ever felt trapped working for someone they no longer respect. Stay with this story, because in about 12 minutes we are going to give you a specific framework Seneca developed for exactly this situation, not in abstract philosophy, but in concrete decisions you can apply this week. But to understand the framework, you need to understand the man and the impossible position he was placed in. Lucius Annaeus Seneca was born around 4 BC in Cordoba, in the Roman province of Hispania Baetica. His father was Seneca the Elder, a wealthy reader who moved the family to Rome while Lucius was still an infant. By the time he was a young man, Seneca was already one of the most brilliant intellects in the city, studying under Stoic teachers, practicing Pythagorean dietary habits, nearly dying from tuberculosis in his 20s. He recovered, went into law and politics, rose rapidly under Emperor Caligula, then was nearly executed by Caligula on what most historians believe were fabricated charges. He survived that. Then under Claudius in 41 AD, he was exiled to the island of Corsica, accused of adultery with the emperor's niece, Julia Livilla. He spent 8 years on that island, writing, thinking, and watching the world from a distance. This is the man who in 49 AD was recalled from exile by the new Empress Agrippina the Younger, Nero's mother. She wanted the best mind in Rome to educate her 12-year-old son. She got Seneca, and from that moment forward, Seneca's fate was tied to one of the most dangerous families in Roman history. What most people imagine when they think of Seneca and Nero is a wise old philosopher trying to civilize a young monster. The reality was far more complicated. When Nero came to power in 54 AD at the age of 16, the first 5 years of his reign were, by most ancient accounts, genuinely good. Seneca, working alongside the Praetorian prefect Burrus, effectively ran the empire. Tacitus, writing in the Annals, called this period the Quinquennium Neronis, Nero's 5 good years. The Senate was respected, provincial administration improved, capital punishment was restrained, and Seneca, writing furiously during these years, produced some of his greatest works, on clemency, on the brevity of life, the early epistles. He was not simply a prisoner of the court. For a time, he was one of its architects. But something was already wrong beneath the surface. Agrippina, who had engineered Nero's rise, found herself being pushed out. Nero resented her control. By 55 AD, just 1 year into his reign, Nero had already arranged the poisoning of his stepbrother Britannicus, his rival for the throne. Seneca was present in the court when this happened. He did not resign. This is the first of several moments where historians and philosophers have argued about Seneca's moral choices. He knew what had happened to Britannicus. He understood the kind of man Nero was becoming, and yet he stayed. Understanding why he stayed, and whether it was wisdom or complicity, is exactly what makes this story so modern, so recognizable, and so uncomfortable. Hook. Here is the question that will reframe everything you think you know about Stoic philosophy. Seneca wrote, in Epistle 77, that a man should leave a situation the moment it begins to corrupt him from the inside. But he also wrote, in On Benefits, that loyalty to a person who saved your life, even a bad person, carries its own moral weight. He was quoting himself against himself, and he knew it. By 59 AD, the situation became impossible to rationalize. Nero murdered his own mother. Agrippina, the woman who had recalled Seneca from exile and placed him at the center of Roman power, was assassinated on her son's orders. Her ship was sabotaged. It didn't kill her. She swam to shore. Nero sent soldiers to finish the job. She reportedly bared her abdomen to the assassin and said, "Strike here, the womb that bore such a monster." After the murder, Nero sent Seneca a message asking him to help draft the letter to the Senate explaining Agrippina's death, and Seneca wrote it. This is the moment that has troubled Seneca's legacy more than any other. A man who wrote entire treatises on virtue drafted the official justification for a matricide. He was not holding the sword, but he held the pen. Why? The honest answer is that by 59 AD, Seneca had become so deeply embedded in the machinery of imperial power that there was no clean exit. His wealth, enormous, controversial, criticized even by his contemporaries, came from Nero's court. His safety depended on continued usefulness to the emperor, and he may have genuinely believed that his presence inside the court was still doing more good than his absence would. This is the rationalization that every person who has ever stayed in a morally compromised institution eventually makes. The system needs people like me inside it. If I leave, someone worse takes my place. I am holding back the worst impulses by staying. Seneca was sophisticated enough to know this logic could be self-serving. He wrote about it explicitly in Epistle 14, warning against mistaking comfort for duty. By 62 AD, everything changed in a single moment. Burrus, the Praetorian prefect who had been Seneca's partner in governing, the other half of the rational center of Nero's reign, died of throat cancer. With Burrus gone, Nero's new advisors were men who hated Seneca. They whispered to Nero that his old tutor was too rich, too famous, too influential, a shadow emperor who made the real emperor look small. Seneca understood what was happening. He went to Nero directly in 62 AD, and in one of the most remarkable conversations recorded by Tacitus in Annals Book 14, he asked to resign. He offered to return his wealth, give up his influence, retire from court. Nero embraced him, told him he was indispensable, wept, and refused. The resignation was denied. The trap had closed. Seneca did the only thing left available to him. He withdrew as far as he could without actually leaving. He stopped attending court. He declined banquets. He claimed illness and received visitors at home. He wrote, in the final 3 years of his life, Seneca produced the Epistulae Morales, 124 letters addressed to his friend Lucilius, which are among the most personal and urgent philosophical documents ever written. These letters were not academic exercises. They were a man processing his situation in real time. In Epistle 1, he opens with, "Reclaim yourself, Lucilius. Collect and save the time which till lately was being stolen from you." In Epistle 12, he writes about aging without flinching. In Epistle 77, he addresses the question of whether a life cut short by someone else's power can still be a complete life. He was writing to Lucilius. He was writing to himself. And in a way that he likely suspected, he was writing to us. To anyone who would one day find themselves in a situation where the powerful have turned against them and the only sovereignty left is interior. The letters are remarkably specific. He names his anxieties. He catches himself in self-deception. He is not performing wisdom. He is trying to actually achieve it. In about 5 minutes, we're going to show you the specific Stoic technique Seneca developed during this period, what he called the premeditation of adversity, and how it applies directly to anyone navigating a workplace or relationship where the power dynamic has gone dangerously wrong. But first, the end of the story, because the end is where the philosophy either holds or it doesn't. In April of 65 AD, a conspiracy against Nero was uncovered. It was called the Pisonian conspiracy, named after Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a wealthy senator who was the plot's figurehead. The plan was to assassinate Nero at the Circus Maximus during the games celebrating the goddess Ceres. The conspiracy included senators, equestrians, military officers, and one of Nero's own Praetorian tribunes. It failed. One of the conspirators, a freedwoman named Epicurus, had tried to recruit a naval officer who instead reported her to Nero. The arrests began. Under torture, names were extracted. And among the names that surfaced through testimony that was almost certainly coerced and possibly fabricated was Seneca's. The evidence against Seneca was thin. A man named Antonius Natalis claimed that Seneca had sent a message to Piso saying that his own health prevented him from meeting, but that his welfare was bound to Piso's. This was the entirety of the case. a vague message, an overheard conversation. The word of a man trying to save his own life through accusation. Nero did not need strong evidence. He needed an excuse. On the 19th of April, 65 AD, he sent a tribune and soldiers to the villa where Seneca was dining with his wife Paulina and two friends. The tribune delivered the message: Seneca was to die. The method was left to Seneca's choice. This was the Roman custom when a man of status was condemned, the dignity of choosing your own end. Tacitus records what happened next in Annals, Book 15, Chapter 63, in prose of almost unbearable precision. Seneca said he had anticipated this. He asked for his will. Nero's soldiers refused to allow it. He turned to his friends who were weeping and said, "What has become of your philosophy? What has become of the maxims we have so long studied together against the evils of fortune?" His wife Paulina declared that she would die with him. She bared her arm. Seneca accepted this with love and, Tacitus tells us, without wanting her to suffer what he was about to suffer. He instructed the soldiers that she was to be kept alive, that his fame was enough for him, that she had more life to live. They restrained her and bandaged her wounds. She survived, though Nero later gave orders that saw to her remaining years being difficult ones. Seneca opened the veins in both wrists and both ankles. The blood flowed slowly. He was old and his body had been weakened by years of a spare diet, the discipline he had practiced. He dictated his final thoughts to scribes he had called in. He moved to a bath of warm water to accelerate the bleeding. He suffocated finally in the steam. He was approximately 69 years old. Tacitus, who was not a fan of Seneca's political compromises, nevertheless records this death with enormous respect. The scene is written without irony. A man who had spent his entire life writing about how to die well, died well. Whatever you think of the choices he made while living, the final choice was unambiguous. He did not beg. He did not betray anyone to save himself. He met the end with the calm he had argued for on paper. There is one detail in Tacitus's account that almost everyone misses, one line that completely changes how we should understand Seneca's 13 years in Nero's court. We will get to it in just a moment. But first, the crossing point. Because everything we have just described, every compromise, every trap, every impossible calculation, you have faced a version of this. Let's talk about that. But what does this mean for you, watching this in 2026? Seneca did not work for a Roman emperor. He worked for a person with enormous power over his life, a person he had helped create, a person whose approval he had come to depend on financially and socially, and a person who was becoming increasingly dangerous and irrational. That is not ancient history. That is a situation millions of people recognize right now. The first modern situation. You are working under a leader who has shifted. Maybe they were good once, genuinely good, and something changed. Power, fear, new advisors, pressure from above. The person you signed up to work for is not the person sitting in that office anymore, and you have built enough of your identity, your income, and your network around this relationship that leaving feels impossible. Seneca's situation is almost exactly this. He helped build Nero. He invested years into that relationship. His wealth, his reputation, his safety, all of it was tied to a man who was deteriorating. And the psychological trap of that situation is not weakness. It is the natural consequence of deep investment. The longer you have been loyal to something, the harder it is to see clearly whether you are staying out of wisdom or out of fear. The second modern situation. You are not being asked to do anything illegal. You are being asked to do something just slightly wrong. Draft the letter, sign off on the report. Stay silent in the meeting when you know the numbers are bad. Each individual request is small enough to rationalize. But Seneca understood, he wrote about this in Epistle 97, that moral corruption rarely arrives as a catastrophe. It arrives as a sequence of small concessions. So here is the specific Stoic technique Seneca used during his final years in partial withdrawal from Nero's court, and which he wrote about explicitly in the letters. He called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. But Seneca's version of it went further than most people realize. He did not simply imagine bad outcomes to prepare emotionally. He used the exercise as a decision-making tool. In Epistle 24 he writes, Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The practical version of this, stripped of Roman metaphor, is a specific question you ask yourself at the end of every week. If this situation continued exactly as it is for one more year, and then another, and then 5 more, who would I be at the end of that period? Not what would I have, who would I be? This question cuts through the noise because it bypasses short-term rationalization. We are extraordinarily good at justifying the present. This month is different, things are changing, my situation is about to improve. The premeditation exercise forces you to extend the timeline and ask whether the trajectory, held constant, leads somewhere you can live with, or somewhere that will require you to explain yourself to a mirror. Seneca developed a second tool during this period, visible in Epistle 47 and throughout his final letters. He called it the internal referendum, the practice of regularly asking not what the powerful person in your life thinks of you, but what you think of yourself. Not self-esteem in the modern therapeutic sense. Something harder, a clear-eyed inventory of whether your actions over the past week are consistent with the person you claim to be. In practice, this means 2 things. First, separate the external situation from the internal response. You may not be able to change who your boss is, what the company does, or how the powerful behave, but you retain always the capacity to choose how you respond, what you say in meetings, what you sign, what you refuse to sign, how you treat the people below you in the hierarchy when no one powerful is watching. Second, know the difference between staying strategically and staying out of fear. This is the hardest distinction Seneca ever tried to make in his own life, and his letters suggest he was not always sure which one he was doing. The test he proposed in On Tranquility of Mind, Chapter 6, is this. Are you still able to act in accordance with your values inside this situation? If the answer is yes, staying may be justified. If the answer is no, the institution has already won. Now for the detail in Tacitus that almost everyone misses. When Seneca is asking his friends where their philosophy has gone, when he is comforting them rather than being comforted, Tacitus adds a line. Seneca then asked for his notebooks and began dictating. He was still writing. Even at the moment of dying, he was producing thought he believed might be useful to someone who came after. He had fully accepted that the work was the point, not the survival. This is the final Stoic principle in action. Not just equanimity in the face of death, but purposefulness. The Stoics called this kathekon, the appropriate action, the thing that is yours to do given your nature and your circumstances. Seneca had decided, somewhere in those final years of semi-retirement, that his appropriate action was to leave a record of thinking clearly under pressure, so he kept doing it, right to the end. What does this mean for you? It means that even in a situation you cannot fully control, even inside an institution or relationship that is limiting your freedom, there is almost always some version of your core work that remains available to you. The question Seneca forces us to ask is, what is the thing that is yours to do, regardless of whether anyone gives you permission? And are you doing it? Now for the actionable technique, the one you can apply this week, not in theory. It is a 3-part reflection Seneca describes across Epistles 1, 24, and 77, assembled into a single daily practice. Some call it the Senecan audit. It takes about 8 minutes and requires nothing but a notebook or a notes application on your phone. Part 1, the time question. Seneca opens Epistle 1 with the command to reclaim your time, specifically to identify where it is being taken without your full consent. Not stolen through obvious coercion, but quietly absorbed by obligations you accepted without choosing. Write down the 3 things that consumed the most of your time this week. For each one, write a single word that describes how you feel when you are doing it. That word is information. Part 2, the character question. This comes from the internal referendum practice. Write down one thing you did this week that you are genuinely proud of, not an achievement in the external sense, but a moment when you acted in accordance with who you say you are. Then write down one thing you did or failed to do that you are not proud of. No judgment, just inventory. The Stoics called this the evening review, and Marcus Aurelius practiced it as well. Part 3. The trajectory question. This is the premeditation exercise. Write the words, "If nothing changes in 12 months," then finish the sentence honestly. Not with hope, not with what you want to happen, with what the current trajectory actually suggests. Then write, "The thing that is mine to do, regardless of what the situation allows, is," fill it in. That last answer is your kathekon, your appropriate action. Start there tomorrow. The journaling prompt for this week. One question, worth sitting with for at least 10 minutes. Is there a situation in my life right now where I am staying because I have genuinely decided it is right to stay, or because leaving would require admitting that I made a mistake by getting involved in the first place? Seneca grappled with this question for years. He was honest enough, eventually, to know the answer. The question is whether we are. One more thing about Seneca's legacy that is worth sitting with. His critics, and there were many, both ancient and modern, point to the gap between what he preached and what he practiced. He wrote about poverty while being one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He wrote about avoiding the powerful while serving the most powerful man alive. Juvenal mocked him. Cassius Dio attacked him. Even Tacitus noted the contradictions. And here's where Seneca himself gives us the most honest answer. Not in a treatise, but in Epistle 57, where he writes, "I am not yet wise, and to keep you from hoping that I will be, I will tell you that I never will be." He was not claiming to have solved the problem of living well under power. He was demonstrating, in real time with his real failures visible, what it looks like to genuinely try. That is a different kind of courage. The gap between Seneca's ideals and his life is not a disqualification of his philosophy. It is the most honest possible argument for it. He knew, better than anyone, how hard these things actually are. That is not hypocrisy. Or not only hypocrisy. It is the testimony of a man who tested the ideas against real conditions and found them both true and brutally difficult to execute. That is more useful to us than the testimony of someone who never faced the test. Seneca died in April of 65 AD. Nero was murdered by his own court 3 years later, in 68 AD, and died in such disgrace that he reportedly had to beg a servant to help him cut his own throat. The empire Seneca had helped administer survived both of them. The letters Seneca wrote in those final years of partial withdrawal, 124 of them, have been read continuously for 2,000 years. They are available right now in translation for less than $20. The detail worth carrying with you is not the drama of the forced suicide, as arresting as that story is. It is the 13 years before it. Seneca made compromised choices inside a system that demanded compromised choices, and he kept writing, kept thinking, kept trying to understand what integrity looks like when purity is no longer available as an option. That is the question most of us are actually living with, whether we name it that way or not. The Stoic answer, Seneca's answer, earned at the highest possible cost, is not that you should be perfect. It is that you should be honest about where you are. You should keep the internal referendum running even when the results are uncomfortable. You should know the difference between a strategic compromise and a surrendered value. And you should always, always know what the thing is that is yours to do, and keep doing it. If this story changed the way you think about Seneca or about your own situation, the best next step is to read Epistles 1, 12, and 77. They are short, they are direct, and they read like messages written to you specifically. Not because Seneca was clairvoyant, but because the situation he was describing, time running out, power pressing down, the question of what to do with whatever freedom remains, is not a Roman problem. It is a human one. We release a new video every week on Stoic philosophy through real historical stories. Not generic self-help, not disconnected history. The actual lives of people who tested these ideas against real conditions with real consequences. If that is what you are looking for, subscribe and turn on notifications. And if this specific story is one you want to return to, save it, because the details are the kind that land differently the second time through.